Hi. So in the previous video, we finally introduced what stress is as a superior quantity, and we concluded that this superior quantity is nothing but the transformer we introduced in the earlier part of the series. But still, we don't have a clear picture of what a stress is. We just have some abstract understanding. It is something superior that holds information about everything about every direction. In this video, we are going to see what tensors are and why, and we'll try to get to the conclusion that why stresses are tensors. Okay, so we'll start by some philosophical arguments before attempting to understand what is a tensor. Okay, so consider a world before humans or any life form. No plants, no animals, nothing. Okay, there is no conscious being in this universe. So even at that time, the properties, physical properties like temperature, mass, speed, velocity, those things would have existed. Although there won't be any name like this because we gave these names, but these properties did exist at that time also. And suddenly, after sometime, we arrive into this world and we start to make sense of what's happening around us. Why does thing behave the way they do? And we develop some special ways and methods and tools to study the nature, all the things around us. We call these methods and tools science and mathematics. Okay, and we discover those physical properties. Those existed for a long time before our arrival. We discover few of them. Many of them are still maybe are waiting to be discovered, and try to represent these physical properties in a more understandable way using the tools that we have developed, the science and the mathematics. Okay, now let us take example of the few physical properties that we know: temperature, weight, mass, or speed and velocity, or the forces. So what we usually represent, how do we represent these physical properties in physics? We use some kind of reference or coordinate systems to represent the physical properties. For example, for temperature, we use a reference like what the 0 degree Celsius should be. We take a reference and we, with respect to that reference, we specify the temperatures. Okay. Similarly, the weight and mass, we use a reference. And for speed and velocity, we know that we use 3 vector components in a coordinate system or to represent a velocity vector or a force vector. Okay, so this is how we make use of the tools that we have developed or to understand these properties, and then manipulate them to understand more complicated physical processes in which these physical properties are involved. Okay, so the physical property themselves doesn't require the coordinate system for the representation. They are what they are. They existed before even we existed. We gave them a name. We gave them an understandable representation. Okay, so it's not they are the properties doesn't need us. Okay, we need these representations for us to understand what these properties are and to manipulate them. Okay, and you also know that if we change the coordinate system, okay, these components, okay, these representations that we are talking about of these physical properties changes. For example, if you change the reference for a 0 degree Celsius temperature, then the complete scale changes. Okay, for example, for some random day, someone starts to say, we consider that now 1 kg will call 1 kg 2 kg. Okay, from that day, if you change the reference, everything will be changed. Okay, but 2 kg itself was 2 kg. The mass didn't change. The way we represented it, we assigned a number to it, the number changed. So these coordinate systems and references are for our use, and as we change them, this representation might change, but actual physical property in its true form doesn't change. Now, the few physical ways that we represent physical properties are these. We already know them. Like scalar, we assign a number or a component, just a component. Okay, there is no direction. For example, temperature T, we assign the value T1. And a vector, we represent anything with 3 components and has a direction. a magnitude and a direction. Okay, so if you write a vector in this form, so each component of this vector, like this component v1 e1, has a magnitude and a direction. Okay, we are talking in component terms right now. Okay, these components are definitely represented in some coordinate system with e1 e2 e3 as their basis vectors. Right, now the second order tensors. Okay, so in second order tensors, this is something new that we are introducing now, which is actually something superior to the scalar and vectors. Each component, like these components, are specified along two directions. What do you mean by two direction? We don't know right now. We can't imagine a two direction. We know a single direction. What is a combined direction? Let us call them a double direction for just simplicity. Okay, so we write a second order tensor like this sigma as this, where this term e1, some weird operator cross with circle e1, this is a double direction. Let us call them a double direction or a dyadic direction. Okay, there could be triadic direction or quartic direction, something like that. Let us call them dyadic direction. So you can see that each component, okay, here we have 9 components, right? Each component now requires two directions, e1 e1. These are the basis vectors of the coordinate space, and this a scalar value. Okay, so two directions. We don't know how to see these two directions, right? Okay, I think this slide is going to be repeated. Okay, now let us try to find few ways to represent the physical properties. We already know that. For example, scalars, where we just specify one components, like there is no direction, like example t is equals to t1, and the vectors, okay, like velocities and force. Each component of this vector, if you write it in this form, each component requires a scalar value v1 and a direction e1, which is nothing but the basis vector of the coordinate system in which you are specifying this velocity v. Okay, so each component you can see has one direction component and a scalar component. Now we introduce a new way of representing superior to scalar and vector. This is called second order tensor, and each component of the second order tensor is specified along two direction. Okay, in a specific coordinate system, what is a two direction? We know how to move in one direction. How can you move in two directions simultaneously? I mean, you can't imagine it. It's very difficult to grasp this thing physically, but let us call for time being this direction as a dyadic direction. Okay, so that's why for a second order tensor like sigma, we'll have 9 components, because we are choosing out of 3 direction, 2 direction at a time. Right? We have 1, 2 and 3 direction, okay, on the basis vectors, and we choose 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3 and so on. We can choose there are 9 possible combinations. Okay, for example, for a simple vector v, there were only we had to choose just one direction. We choose the 3 directions, which is the 3 basis vectors. But for a second order tensor, we are talking about double direction or dyadic direction. That's why we have 9 options. That's why we have 9 components. Okay, this is a weird way of representing a dyadic direction, okay, which is actually called a dyadic product. We will see what a dyadic product is in the next slides. So you just need to remember, this is the second order tensor are something superior to scalar and vector. So where did we use the superior term last time? We call the stresses as the superior properties. So don't you think the superior properties need a superior representation? Okay, so that's why I think we try to represent these kind of superior properties as this superior in the superior representation called second order tensors. Okay, now so each component requires 2 direction that we've already discussed. That's why we have 9 components in this for the second order tensor. Okay, so let's focus on the second order tensor for time being. Okay, So this was how we represented a second order tensor in the component form. And what the hell is this A cross inside a circle B? Okay, this is actually called a dyadic product, and we called it a double direction or dyadic direction, and we formally call this dyadic product of two vectors. See, these A and B are two vectors. See, E1 and E1 were basis vectors, and they will also have three components. For example, E1 will have components 1, 0, 0, E3 will have 0, 0, 1, and similarly. So A and B are two vectors. It is defined for any two vectors. Okay, so how do we calculate this? So if we have two vectors like A and B like this, where A1, A2, A3 and B1, B2, B3 are components of this vector in some coordinate system. So you need to remember that these components are expressed in some coordinate system. You need to always say that in which coordinate system you're talking about. Okay, because as you change the coordinate system, these components might change, although these properties won't change because they don't know what a basis function or what method we have chosen. Okay, now since A dyadic B is nothing but A into B transpose, which is A1 B1, A1 B2, A1 B3. This is how. So we just take transpose and do the matrix multiplication. You get this kind of the matrix. Okay, so this is similar to a tensor, right? So this comp is a tensor in itself. Okay, for example, for a vector V, we saw that each V1 E1 plus V2 E2 plus V3 E3, each E1 was vector itself, right? Direction was the vector. In this case, the direction is tensor itself. So it's very difficult to grasp these things. So I mean, how can this tensor be a direction? So you can just simply make a simple picture in your mind that it's some double direction at the same time. How do we move it? It's difficult to imagine. You can't do that. So let's see how does you formulate this sigma. For example, in this coordinate system, these are the basis vectors, and you represent them in the component form in this coordinate system itself as 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, and 0, 0, 1. Now let us try to calculate these terms, E1 dyadic E1, and so on. Okay, using this definition, right? That's what we get. For 1, 1, we get 1, 1 term is equals to 1 rest 0. For 2, 2, we get 2, 2 term 0. For say 2, 3, we get second row third column this term as 1 rest all zeros, and as we linearly combine them, we'll get sigma 1, 1 at this location, sigma 2, 2, sigma 1, 2 at 1, 2 location, and so on, right? So this is how you construct the sigma. Okay, so let us discuss a bit more upon the second order tensor, what they are. Okay, so let me give an example. The inertia tensor, you know what inertia is. Inertia is something like a rotational mass, or the tendency of a rotational body to resist rotational motion. Okay, a rotating body, or the effort that you require to start the rotary motion, that is represented by the inertia of a rotating body. And this inertia actually varies with the axis you are axis about which you are trying to move. Okay, and we represent this inertia also as a tensor. Okay, so what does these terms individually means for this inertia tensor? Okay, so for example, I11, if I, J and K are the basis like X, Y and Z, where X is 1, Y is 2 and Z is 3, then I11 and I22 and I33 are inertia about X, Y and Z axis. It's very simple to understand. What about the cross terms like I12, I13, I23? These terms, they are nothing but the product of inertia. Okay, not the exact moment of inertia. We call them product of inertia. What does that thing physically mean? This actually means, for example, there is a fan that rotates about some axis, say Z. So suppose if you place an unbalanced mass on one of the blade of the fan, okay, so the inertia about Z axis changes, but the introduction of the extra unbalanced mass on one of the blade actually made changes more than change in inertia. It actually introduced an unbalance in the system. So how do we represent that unbalance? Okay, we try to move the fan in some another direction. Okay, like with respect to x axis. Okay, it's already moving with respect to z-axis, and now we move it with respect to x-axis. Okay, and then we can say the impact of this imbalance will come into picture. So this I12 is nothing but the inertia of a body which is rotating about some axis, say 2, okay, which is already rotating, and we calculate the inertia with respect to axis 1. Okay, let me give another example. For example, the I31 term, what does it represent? For example, if the body is already moving along, rotating around axis 1, and now if you try to rotated about axis 3, what would be the inertia? So that's what this cross terms means. Okay, so in this way you can have any axis, okay, of about which is a body could be rotating, right? So how do we because this inertia will keep on changing, right, depending upon which axis you are using, similar to which plane we used, okay, to calculate the tractions. Similarly, this inertia changes. That's why this inertia is also a superior property like stress, because it, in a single package, it contains all the information that you give me any axis, I'll give you the inertia about that axis. Okay, it is also a transformation. It is also a property as well as a transformation. Okay, you have already known inertia because this thing actually comes when you study the rotation in 3D space. You might have not come across these things if you just dealt with 2D rotations and so on. Okay, so that's what we discussed. That's what written here. So for the moment of inertia tensor, is a convenient way to summarize all moment of inertia of an object with just one quantity. Okay, that's what stress is doing for us in context of structural mechanics. So I think this would give you a certain feel, okay, about what these second order tensors are. They are some superior quantity that contains information about all possible orientations or all possible directions. Similar to inertia tensor, you can get a feeling of what a stress tensor is. Let us quickly discuss what are the dimensions of a tensor. Okay, so in the previous all slides we represented these physical properties in a 3D space with 3 basis vectors, right? But it is possible that we could express them in a lower dimension space, it's a 2D space like in a plane, or a higher dimensional space like a 4D space, okay, that we don't know how to think of. So we represented sigma. When we add this thing, we calculated what E1 is, we calculated this dyadic products, and we come to this thing. Okay, this is what our matrix transformer is that we discussed, and so we can represent this second order tensor in this matrix form. Okay, so the stress, earlier we thought it is a maximizer, simple matrix operator. Then this stress and our transformer were the same thing, and then we found out that this is nothing but a tensor, a superior way of representing a superior property. Okay, similar to a vector v1, we represent v in this type of column vector. We represent a second order tensor in this form of a matrix, where it is n by n matrix, where n is the dimension of the space in which you are describing this property. Okay, for example, if you are in 2D space, v will only have 2 components. Similarly, sigma will only have 2 by 2 components. Okay, so this was a tensor in 3 dimension. It was 3 by 3. In 4 dimension, it will look something like this. This is a second order tensor in 4D, and this is second order tensor in 3D. What about the third order tensor, which is superior to the second order tensors? What properties would it represent? We are not going to discuss that right now. So this third order tensor, how will we represent them in this kind of matrix form? Basically, now it will be a 3 by 3 by 3 matrix. Okay, various sheets of these matrix will be stacked one behind another 3 times, and that's how we represent. Okay, and in what will change in this expression, we'll have a in place of dyadic, we'll have some kind of triplet direction. Okay, don't try to picture it because you won't be able to do it. Okay, again a philosophical argument we are going into. So what all things we can visualize, because we struggle to visualize stresses or inertia tensors or dyadic products or tensors. Okay, we just had a feeling for that, but we couldn't visualize them. So what all thing that can visualize, what was the constraint? Why couldn't we, why are we not able to visualize these things? For example, let's see the example of temperature, a line, and velocity. Out of these three things, what do you think you can visualize? I think initially you will think that all of them. Let us discuss temperature first. When you see temperature, this picture comes into your mind. But what is this? This is a scale in which you are seeing the level of mercury. But what's the temperature? Actually, you are not seeing temperature here. You are seeing a scale and the level of the mercury, and what it's showing a number. Okay, so you have developed some tools that represent that temperature. You are not observing temperature, you are observing something else that you have devised to understand the temperature, similar to the way we represented them. Okay, but you can see a line, right? You can draw it. I have actually drawn it on this slide, so you can obviously see lines, so you can visualize them. What about velocity? You can write them as a vector, but you can visualize them. You visualize forces, you draw them as a like arrows. So is it true? Can you visualize velocities? The thing is, you can't. Actually, what you are visualizing is nothing but, again, a representation of this velocity in a geometric form. So we say that all we can visualize are geometries, nothing else. You can't visualize properties. You can only visualize the geometries. Or what if we have done with velocities and temperatures and so on, velocities and forces, is that since we have been using these arrows for a long period of time since our high school, so that's why we have now started to believe that these representation itself are the properties, but they are not. They are just representations. They are just geometry. If you see, just forget about the velocity. If you see a vector, this is just a geometry. You draw it by hand. Okay, so you can't visualize things. You can't visualize temperature. Similarly, in the similar way, you can't visualize what sadness is. You can only feel it, something like that, of that sort. So that's why you can only visualize the geometries. For velocity, for vectors or the first order tensors, what's the a beneficial thing is that both of they actually require three components. And our geometric vectors, our geometric representation that we can see, also require three components for representation, right? So that's why we represent them similar to our geometric vectors, okay, the geometric arrows. Okay, so that's why you are able to draw them in 3D, but that's because they have similar representation as the geometric vectors. Okay, like a representation of points, we use the line, so you can visualize those things because they are geometries but not velocities. So remember that whatever you are visualizing, whatever property you are trying to represent, is basically you have associated some kind of geometrical meaning to that velocity or that property. For example, arrows to velocity, and that's how you make sense of all these things, and you try to understand those velocity and manipulate them and make some decisions about them. So what about tensors? Okay, like we claim that stress is a tensor. What about tensor? We will see that we'll introduce a similar kind of geometric representation for stresses as well. We'll call them stress cubes. Okay, from this discussion we can get satisfied that it's not our limitations that we are not able to visualize these properties, because we can't. We haven't seen anything other than geometries ever. All we see are the geometries. So that's why you are not able to visualize these physical properties. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we'll see why stresses are tensor. We just introduce what tensors are, and we try to justify that it's not possible to visualize them because actually you are not able to visualize any properties. So it's nothing new with the tensors. Okay, so that's it for this video. We'll introduce stresses as a tensor in the next video. Please subscribe if you like these videos. Thank you for your time.